The G4TV comeback, in all honesty, is a sad one. A classic of its time and a relic of ours, G4TV seemed doomed from the start, although many held out hope that some sort of miracle might happen. Ultimately, it never did, and only a year into the relaunch, it is all over. Now here we are in the dust of it all, while everybody is pointing fingers at everyone, trying to make sense of what just happened. Now, one technical director recently spoke out and revealed that the company was a complete disaster behind the scenes, and considering that they are now shut down, I believe him. He cited a lack of new ideas, the underutilization of talent and mismanagement as the reason for the downfall. He also mentioned that top streamers like Pokimane would get up to $20,000 to host a channel on Twitch, but ultimately none of that was enough. G4TV is now officially over, and there is plenty of blame to go around. Now, before we get too deep into all of this, let's just also back up a little bit. By this point, we all know the story of G4TV, the past, the present, and the aftermath. There really is not much of a point to go over all of the history again. However, new information about what happened behind the scenes seems to be popping up all the time, and the latest set of information is coming to us thanks to a former G4TV technical producer who worked with the company from 2006 to 2012 and had many colleagues who actually were rehired for the reboot. Now, honestly, after listening to the man, he does talk a lot of sense. Now, Clownfish TV said in their article, Chris Flynn is a former G4TV technical director who worked at the network from 2006 to 2012 up to when the network was cancelled. He oversaw many of the technical elements of the show being aired at the time, including effects and camera shots for Attack of the Show and more. Chris also worked on various productions at a different studio in Hollywood before and after the original G4TV was live on air. Like many alumni from the original version of the network, Chris had many opinions and thoughts to share about the new G4TV shutting down, including insight into the information he learned as things went south. I felt they came back with a hollowed out version of Attack of the Show. I had advanced knowledge through inside sources 6 weeks ahead of time what they were doing and what the plan was. Sitting down for an interview with YouTube channel VGX7, Chris details that his source, who was rehired by G4TV, informed him that the ones in charge of the network had no intention of bringing back older shows that were popular classics from G4TV. Everyone was going to focus on what was new, including a big connection to esports. He also goes on to note towards the latter part of the interview that the campaign for hashtag G4 needs talent was also a complete mess, where most of the talent added to the network was already decided well in advance. Now, one thing that I will say is that I do think that the network focusing on new shows is a good idea. Bringing back all of those old shows that most of the newer viewers never even knew existed is probably not the best idea. New talent working on new shows that speak for an audience of today is what you want. The problem is that they could never execute new ideas properly, and as a result, things just kept going nowhere. Now, according to Chris's sources, the network was very scattered and didn't even figure out or have a crew as close to around 2 weeks prior to the relaunch. Many people didn't know how to approach making things work. Stories coming out of the network were very bad according to what Chris was being told by his sources. Some executives on the show had other people running wild and not doing much in nearly the whole time frame of G4 Summers Beach House. You had people who were supposedly running things and building the company, and yet when the director would come in, he would be like, "Oh, thank God you are here." Now, this was the people who were the showrunners. Things got crazy enough that conflict between staff caused a lot of tension, with the shock of working on a real production schedule and trying to maintain order within the production caused some of the people to leave. Now, again, I can understand this. There never seemed to be any real structure to their programming. I tried to tune in a couple of times and I never knew what was going on ever. I think everyone knows that having a set of established shows running every day is probably what you want to do. I also think that they missed the mark by going the TV route and not centering their shows around a Twitch audience. Online content creators are making millions every year, and with proper Twitch and YouTube content, you could have done the same. Podcasts, tournaments, and large creators and game shows just seems to be the formula currently. You have a crew working on game reviews on YouTube, you have a crew working on content on Twitch, you have a podcast team, you have a content team, and you have a game review team. I'm not saying this because I have all the answers, I'm just saying this because that is how successful teams like OTK and 100 Thieves do it, even offline TV. Now you can say that they are content orgs, but honestly adopting that model would have been great. It is just sad to see what could have been. Now one big issue that Chris notes also from the new content produced for G4TV was the rotation of the host and the lackluster gags. Instead of having personalities tied to specific shows, newer content would cycle the pool of talent and underutilize them. Some of the hosts would linger in the background during segments, looking bored rather than allowing them to connect with the audience on the show that they were featured. Typical TV would have two dedicated hosts. Instead of having everyone else twiddling their thumbs on the bench, they would be role players on the bench. Everyone had a role to play. Now in the interview, Chris also goes on to discuss the differences in talent between some of the newer hosts and the older hosts. He notes that many things that worked for the new host coming from Twitch backgrounds didn't work for the audience watching, where the same kinds of gag would be rinsed and repeated when they didn't always work. One day Golden Boy is on Boosted, the next day he's sitting on the couch. They clearly felt like they were underutilized and the whole thing was a disaster. These people are just going to sit on a couch? Now for me as a viewer, the biggest problem has always been the gags. It is just so hard to sit through them, and honestly there's no reason for them. You don't need to be a comedy show, just be a show, and if the host is funny, the humor will just shine through. There is no reason to force anything. Now there is one last thing that I also just very quickly want to touch on, and that is the comments that the former producer made about Frost. One of the more interesting bits to come from the interview was Chris' thoughts on how things transpired about the controversial host Indiana Frost Kieran Black and her speech to the audience. He said, "I understand that you're going to do whatever you want. You are the new G4 and I respect. Just don't screw with our legacy. Once you had Frost telling everyone to go to hell, now you are messing with our legacy. You are taking all of that love and nostalgia that people had for us and now they are questioning it." Chris went on to talk about some of the backlash and fallout from Indiana Black's post on Twitter, including the now infamous tweet right after the first batch of layoffs. He said that this is a person who needs to go away from social media, needs to stop talking in public. Just stop. She said our mandate was to fix the past. Hold on a second, our past needed to be fixed? We lasted 12 years, launched the careers of Olivia Munn and Chris Hardwick. You all crashed and burned in 11 months and Frost is saying that she's leaving the business. How can you say that we needed to be fixed? And I do think that that's a brilliant point. All of these new hosts are coming out and bashing the old G4TV and talking about how they were the problem. I see no problem with a company that lasted 12 years. Clearly their way of doing things lasted a whole lot longer than this whole new way of doing things. And yes, the old G4TV also failed, so fixing some of that was definitely warranted, but yelling at your fans and telling them not to watch it is definitely not going to fix anything.